The stagecoach door swung open, and what stumbled out looked more like a beggar than a bride, her dress torn in 3 places, her bonnet missing, and mud caked so thick on her boots that the leather underneath was anyone's guess. Harrison Vaughn stood on the platform of Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory, shielding her eyes from the brutal afternoon sun of August 1878, trying to remember how she had ended up making such a desperate choice. The journey from Philadelphia had been a nightmare of delays, a broken axle that left her stranded in Kansas for a week, a theft at her roadside inn that took her spare dress and most of her money, and finally, a storm that turned the final leg of the journey into a mud-soaked ordeal. The other passengers had looked at her with pity by the end, and the driver had barely spoken to her at all. She clutched the single carpet bag that contained everything she owned now, which amounted to 1 torn petticoat, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and the letters. Those precious letters from Blake Anderson, cattleman, who had written to her with such kindness after her advertisement appeared in the Matrimonial Times. His words had been simple but genuine, describing his ranch outside Fort Sumner, his need for a wife to share his life, and his promise to provide a good home. Harrison scanned the sparse crowd gathered at the stage stop, looking for a man matching the description Blake had provided. Tall, dark hair, usually wearing a black hat and a leather vest. Her heart hammered against her ribs, part anxiety and part shame at her appearance. What would he think when he saw her like this? Would he send her back east on the next stage? A figure detached itself from the shadow of the station house, and Harrison's breath caught. The man who approached was indeed tall, with shoulders broad enough to block the sun. He wore dusty denim pants, scuffed boots, and a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing a strong-jawed face weathered by sun and wind, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of summer sky that studied her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Miss Vaughn." His voice was deep, with a gentle rumble that somehow put her at ease despite her nervousness. "Yes," Harrison managed, her throat dry from dust and fear. "Mr. Anderson," he nodded slowly, his gaze traveling over her bedraggled appearance without the judgment she had expected. Instead, something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes that looked almost like concern. "You have had a difficult journey." It was a statement, not a question, and the kindness in it nearly undid her. Harrison felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had cried enough on this journey, cried when the thieves took her belongings, cried when she realized she would arrive looking like this, cried when she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life leaving Philadelphia. She would not cry now, not in front of this stranger who was supposed to become her husband. "The trip was longer than expected," she said, lifting her chin with what dignity she could muster. "I apologize for my appearance. There were some complications." Blake Anderson stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his lips curved into something that was almost a smile. "No apology needed. You are here, and that is what matters. Are you hungry?" The question surprised her. She had expected questions about her journey, perhaps a discussion of their arrangement, maybe even disappointment at her state. She had not expected simple concern for her immediate comfort. "I am, yes." The stage stops had little to offer. He reached for her carpet bag, and Harrison noticed his hands were large and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard. "There is a restaurant at the hotel. Let me buy you a proper meal and then we can talk about everything else." Harrison fell into step beside him as they walked down the dusty main street of Fort Sumner. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings baking under the relentless sun, but there was a certain liveliness to it. Cowboys rode past on horseback. Women in calico dresses carried baskets, and somewhere a dog barked enthusiastically. It felt real in a way that Philadelphia never had, where everything was cobblestones and society rules and the constant weight of expectation. The hotel restaurant was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of frying meat heavy in the air. Blake guided her to a corner table and spoke quietly to the woman who came to take their order. Harrison watched him as he did so, noticing the easy way he carried himself, the respectful nod he gave the woman, the way his accent carried the slow drawl of someone who had lived in the territory for years. When he turned back to her, he seemed to really look at her for the first time, and Harrison fought the urge to smooth her tangled hair or hide her dirty hands. His expression remained kind, though, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "The food will be out shortly. Would you like to wash up? There is a room in the back with a basin." "Thank you," Harrison said, grateful for the escape. She followed the restaurant woman to a small back room where a pitcher of water and a clean basin waited. She washed her face and hands, doing what she could to tame her hair, and when she looked in the small mirror hung on the wall, she barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner than it had been when she left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago, her green eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her brown hair dull with dust. The dress she wore, which had once been a respectable gray traveling dress, was now torn at the hem and stained beyond repair. This was not how she had imagined meeting her future husband. When she had answered his advertisement, when they had exchanged letters over the course of 6 months, she had pictured herself arriving neat and composed, ready to begin this new chapter of her life with at least the appearance of capability. Instead, she looked like someone who could not take care of herself, much less help run a ranch. When she returned to the table, 2 plates of steak, beans, and cornbread waited, and the sight of the food made her stomach growl embarrassingly loud. Blake gestured to her chair, and Harrison sat, trying to remember her table manners even as her hunger urged her to simply devour everything in front of her. "Please, eat," Blake said, and there was understanding in his tone. He had probably seen enough hungry travelers to recognize desperation when he saw it. Harrison tried to pace herself, but the food was better than anything she had eaten in weeks, and before she knew it, her plate was nearly clean. She looked up to find Blake watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Better?" he asked. "Much better, thank you." Harrison set down her fork and forced herself to meet his eyes. "Mr. Anderson, I must explain what happened. I left Philadelphia with suitable clothing and funds, but there were robberies and delays, and I spent more than I planned. By the time I reached Kansas, I had already lost my best dress, and then at a roadside stop, someone stole my trunk from my room while I slept. I reported it to the local sheriff, but nothing came of it. I am not usually so careless or so poorly presented." Blake leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "These things happen on the frontier, Miss Vaughn. The trail from the east is not safe or easy, and you made it here despite the challenges. That tells me more about you than a fancy dress ever could." His words eased something tight in Harrison's chest. "I want you to know that I intend to honor our agreement. I can work hard, I can learn what I need to know about ranch life, and I will be a good wife to you. I may look like I cannot manage anything right now, but I promise you that I am capable." "I believe you," Blake said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Harrison's throat tighten. "But before we go any further, I think you need rest and proper clothing. My ranch is an hour's ride from town, but I have a house here in Fort Sumner as well, a small place I keep for when I need to stay overnight for business. You can stay there tonight, get cleaned up properly, and tomorrow we can make arrangements." Arrangements? Harrison's heart sank. Did he mean to send her back? To dissolve their agreement before it even properly began? Blake must have seen the fear in her face because he quickly shook his head. "For a wedding, Miss Vaughn. If you are still willing, I would like to marry you as we discussed in our letters. But I think we could both use a night to rest and prepare properly. And I need to get you a proper dress. You cannot marry in what you are wearing, and I will not have my bride standing up before the preacher looking like she has just survived a stampede." Relief flooded through Harrison so strongly that she felt dizzy with it. "You still want to marry me, even looking like this?" Blake's expression softened, and he reached across the table to take her hand. His skin was warm and rough against hers, and the simple contact sent a flutter through her stomach that she tried to ignore. "Miss Vaughn, Harrison, if I may, in your letters, you showed me intelligence, humor, and courage. You told me about losing your parents to fever, about struggling to survive in Philadelphia on a seamstress's wages, about wanting a new life where hard work mattered more than social connections. Those letters showed me who you are. The dress you wear does not change any of that." Harrison felt the tears she had been holding back finally spill over, and she quickly wiped at them with her free hand. "I am sorry. I do not usually cry so easily. It has been a very long few weeks." "No need to apologize for honest emotion." Blake squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Finish your meal, and then I will show you to the house. Tomorrow morning we will go to the general store and get you outfitted properly. The store owner's wife has a good eye for such things." The rest of the meal passed in more comfortable conversation. Blake told her about his ranch, the Triple Bar, which ran cattle on 3,000 acres of grazing land. He had built it up over 10 years, starting with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from his father. He employed 5 ranch hands year-round, and more during branding and drive season. He described the house he had built, a solid structure with a stone fireplace and glass windows, which he admitted was probably too large for one man but which he had built hoping to someday fill it with a family. Harrison listened, asking questions about the work and the land, feeling her apprehension gradually transform into something that might have been excitement. This was so different from her life in Philadelphia, where she had spent her days hunched over a sewing machine in a cramped room, working until her fingers bled to afford her tiny rented room. The idea of wide, open spaces and meaningful work called to something deep in her soul. When they finished eating, Blake paid for the meal and led her out into the late afternoon sun. They walked 3 blocks to a small adobe house with a wooden porch and a red door. Blake unlocked it and ushered her inside, and Harrison found herself in a simply furnished space that was blessedly cool after the heat outside. There was a main room with a table and chairs, a small kitchen area with a stove, and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. "The bedroom on the left has a bed and a chest of drawers," Blake said, setting her carpet bag on the table. "There is water in the pitcher, and I will bring more if you need it. I will stay at the ranch tonight and come back in the morning. You can rest and recover from your journey." Harrison looked around the modest space, feeling overwhelmed by the kindness of this man she barely knew. "You are being very generous, considering we have only just met." Blake moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to her. "Harrison, I want you to understand something. I asked you to come here to be my wife, and I meant that. But I also want you to have a choice in this. If after tonight you decide this is not what you want, I will pay for your return journey east and we will part as friends. There is no obligation until we speak our vows before the preacher." "Do you understand?" Harrison nodded, her respect for this man growing by the moment. I understand. Thank you for giving me that choice. I will be back around 9 in the morning. Lock the door behind me and do not open it for anyone but me. Fort Sumner is mostly safe, but it is still a frontier town. He tipped his hat to her and stepped out onto the porch. Harrison followed and stood in the doorway as he walked away, his long stride eating up the dusty street. She watched until he turned a corner and disappeared from sight, then went back inside and locked the door as instructed. The bedroom was simple but clean, with a real bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, and a washstand with a mirror. Harrison stripped off her filthy clothes and washed as thoroughly as she could with the water provided, scrubbing away weeks of travel grime. She washed her hair in the basin, working her fingers through the tangles until it finally felt clean again. Without a proper nightdress, she wrapped herself in a blanket from the bed and laid her torn dress over a chair to see if it could be salvaged. As she sat on the edge of the bed, combing through her wet hair with her damaged brush, Harrison allowed herself to really think about what she was doing. Tomorrow she would marry Blake Anderson, a man she had only met today. By all conventional wisdom, this was insane. And yet, something in her gut told her this was right. Their letters over the past 6 months had revealed much about his character. He wrote about his love for the land, his respect for hard work, his dreams of building something lasting. He had been honest about the difficulties of ranch life, the isolation, the hard winters, and the constant challenges. He had not painted a romantic picture but a realistic one, and Harrison had appreciated that honesty. More than that, she had felt a connection in those letters, a sense that here was someone who understood what it meant to want more from life than what society prescribed. Blake had left Missouri after his parents died to make his own way in the territory, just as she was leaving Philadelphia now. They were both willing to take risks for the chance at something better. Harrison finished combing her hair and climbed into the bed, which was more comfortable than anything she had slept in since leaving home. As she lay there, feeling her exhausted body finally relax, she made her decision. Tomorrow, she would marry Blake Anderson. She would become his wife, help him build his ranch, and make a life in this wild, beautiful territory. It might not be the safe choice, but it felt like the right one. Sleep claimed her quickly, and she did not wake until sunlight streamed through the small window, painting golden squares on the wooden floor. Harrison woke to the sound of someone knocking on the front door and panicked for a moment before she heard Blake's voice calling her name. She grabbed the blanket, wrapped it around herself, and went to the door, opening it just wide enough to peek out. Blake stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking freshly washed and wearing clean clothes. His dark hair was still slightly damp and he smelled of soap and leather. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Harrison admitted, suddenly very aware that she was standing before him wrapped only in a blanket, her hair loose and wild around her shoulders. "I need a few minutes to make myself presentable." Something flickered in Blake's eyes as he looked at her, something warm and appreciative that made Harrison's cheeks flush. But he simply nodded and stepped back. "Take your time. I will wait out here." Harrison closed the door and hurried to the bedroom, where she confronted the problem of her clothing. The gray dress was truly ruined, beyond any repair her sewing skills could manage. She had no choice but to put it back on, tears and stains and all, if she wanted to leave the house. She dressed quickly, braided her hair as neatly as she could without a proper mirror, and emerged to find Blake leaning against the porch railing, looking out at the street. He turned when he heard the door, and his expression grew determined when he saw her still wearing the ruined dress. "That settles it," he said. "First stop is the general store. Come on." They walked together through the morning streets of Fort Sumner, and Harrison was conscious of the looks they drew. She knew how she must appear and kept her head high despite the embarrassment burning in her cheeks. Blake walked beside her with an easy confidence, seemingly unbothered by the attention, and his steady presence helped her maintain her composure. The general store was a large wooden building stocked with everything from flour and beans to saddles and ammunition. A bell jangled as they entered, and a woman in her 40s looked up from behind the counter, her expression friendly until she caught sight of Harrison. Then her eyes widened with sympathy. "Blake Anderson, is this the young lady you mentioned?" the woman asked, coming around the counter. She was plump and pleasant-looking, with graying brown hair pulled into a neat bun. "Martha Cooper, this is Miss Harrison Vaughn, my intended bride," Blake said, and Harrison caught the note of pride in his voice that warmed her despite everything. "She has had a difficult journey and needs proper outfitting. Can you help?" Martha's expression transformed into something fierce and maternal. "Of course I can. You poor dear, come with me. Blake, you wait out here. This is women's business." Before Harrison could protest, Martha had ushered her into a back room stocked with bolts of fabric, ready-made clothes, and various notions. The older woman circled her, making assessing sounds, then began pulling items from shelves with practiced efficiency. "You are about my daughter's size, maybe a touch taller," Martha said, holding up a dress in soft blue calico. "Try this. And you will need undergarments. I can see from here that what you are wearing is falling apart. Stockings, too, and proper boots. When is the wedding?" "Today, if everything goes according to plan," Harrison said, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the woman's kindness. "Blake suggested it for today." Martha's face broke into a wide smile. "Then we definitely need to get you something special. That man has been alone too long, and I am pleased as punch that he found someone. He is a good man, Miss Vaughn, one of the best. You are lucky to have him." "I think I am beginning to understand that," Harrison said softly, accepting the pile of garments Martha thrust into her arms. For the next hour, Martha outfitted her completely. There were chemises and drawers, stockings and a proper corset, petticoats, and 2 everyday dresses in practical calico. There was a Sunday dress in dark green that brought out Harrison's eyes, and finally, Martha pulled out a dress that made Harrison gasp. It was made of cream-colored lace over a silk slip, with long sleeves and a high neck, modest but beautiful. The lace was delicate, forming patterns of flowers and vines, and the silk underneath caught the light like pearl. It was the most beautiful dress Harrison had ever seen, certainly the most beautiful she had ever worn. "This was made for a wedding that never happened," Martha explained, her expression growing sad for a moment. "The bride changed her mind and went back east, and the dress has been sitting in my back room for 2 years. I think it was meant for you." Harrison touched the lace with trembling fingers. "I cannot afford this, Mrs. Cooper. I have almost no money left." Martha waved her hand dismissively. "Blake is taking care of everything. He was quite clear on that point. Now put it on, let me see how it fits." The dress fit as though it had been made for her, skimming her figure and falling in graceful lines to the floor. Martha made a few quick adjustments with pins, tightening the waist slightly, and then stood back with a satisfied nod. "You look like a bride," she declared. "A proper bride. Now let me help you with your hair." Martha sat Harrison down and worked through her long brown hair with skilled fingers, pinning it up into an elegant style that Harrison never could have managed herself. She wove small silk flowers into the arrangement, white ones that matched the dress, and when she finally let Harrison look in the mirror, Harrison barely recognized herself. The woman looking back at her was clean and beautiful, dressed in lace like something precious. The dress transformed her from a bedraggled traveler into someone worthy of being treasured. Tears pricked at Harrison's eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Martha squeezed her shoulders. "It is my pleasure, dear. Now, let me pack up your other things, and then we will show Blake what we have accomplished." Harrison changed back into the least damaged of her traveling clothes for now, saving the lace dress for the ceremony. Martha bundled everything into neat packages, and they emerged from the back room to find Blake leaning against the counter, talking with a gray-haired man Harrison assumed was Martha's husband. Blake looked up as they approached, and his eyes widened when he saw Harrison. Even in the simple dress she was wearing now, one of the new calico ones in blue with small white flowers, she looked transformed. Clean and neat, with her hair properly styled, she looked like herself again. "Much better," Blake said, and the warmth in his voice made Harrison's heart skip. "Thank you, Martha." "Wait until you see the wedding dress," Martha said with a conspiratorial wink. "It is a beauty." Blake paid for everything without blinking at the total, which had to be substantial, and Harrison made a mental note to find ways to make herself useful quickly to justify the expense. They loaded the packages into a wagon Blake had waiting outside, and then he turned to her with a question in his eyes. "Are you ready to get married today? Or would you prefer to wait?" Harrison thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. She had come here to marry this man, to start a new life, and waiting would not change anything. If anything, it would just prolong the nervousness. "I am ready." Blake's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his serious face into something that made Harrison's stomach flutter. "Then let us go see the preacher." They walked together to a small church at the edge of town, a white painted building with a simple cross above the door. The preacher, a thin man with kind eyes and a gentle voice, listened to their request and agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon. He suggested 2 o'clock, which would give them time to arrange for witnesses and allow him to prepare. Blake and Harrison walked back to the small adobe house, and Blake carried her packages inside, stacking them neatly in the bedroom. The intimacy of him in this private space, handling her belongings, made Harrison acutely aware that after today, they would be husband and wife. This stranger would have every right to her, to share her bed, to expect things of her that made her pulse race with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "I will leave you to prepare," Blake said, seeming to sense her sudden nervousness. "I need to handle a few things before the ceremony. I will come back at 1:45. After he left, Harrison sat at the small table and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She was about to marry a man she had known for less than 24 hours. Yes, they had exchanged letters for months, but letters were not the same as truly knowing someone. What if he was cruel once they were married? What if she could not adapt to ranch life? What if she disappointed him? But then she remembered the gentle way he had taken her hand yesterday, the concern in his eyes when he saw her bedraggled state, the way he had immediately thought of her comfort and needs before anything else. She remembered his letters, honest and thoughtful, never pretending to be something he was not. And she remembered Mrs. Cooper's words, "He is a good man, one of the best." Harrison took a deep breath and stood. She would trust her instincts. She would trust the man who had written to her with such sincerity, and she would trust herself to make the best of whatever came. She spent the next few hours preparing carefully. She bathed again in cold water from the pump outside, washing away every trace of dust and travel. She put on the new undergarments, marveling at how much better they felt than her old worn ones. She carefully dressed in the lace wedding dress, managing the buttons with some difficulty, and then styled her hair as best she could to match what Martha had done earlier, weaving in the small silk flowers. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a bride looking back at her. Not the bride she had imagined becoming someday, not the society wedding she had sometimes dreamed of as a girl, but something better, something real and hard-won and precious. A knock at the door announced Blake's arrival, and Harrison opened it to find him transformed as well. He wore a black suit that looked new, a crisp white shirt and a string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaven, and when he saw her, he went completely still. "Harrison," he breathed, and the way he said her name made her feel beautiful. "You look like something out of a dream." "Thank you," she managed, her own breath catching at the sight of him. He was handsome, she realized. She had noticed that he was attractive in a rough, weathered way, but dressed like this, looking at her like that, he was genuinely handsome. Blake offered his arm, and Harrison took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the suit jacket. They walked together to the church, and Harrison was aware of people stopping to watch them pass. Let them look, she thought. Let them see Blake Anderson's bride in her lace dress. Let them see that she was not a beggar but someone treasured. The church was cool and dim inside, lit by afternoon sun streaming through the plain glass windows. The preacher waited at the altar, and Harrison was surprised to see Martha and her husband sitting in the front pew, along with a few other townspeople she did not recognize. Martha caught her eye and smiled encouragingly. Blake led her down the short aisle to stand before the preacher, and the ceremony began. The words were traditional, the promises ancient, but when Harrison spoke her vows, she meant every word. She promised to love and honor Blake Anderson, to be faithful to him, to build a life with him. And when Blake spoke his vows in return, his voice steady and sure, she believed that he meant them too. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Blake turned to her with a question in his eyes. Harrison nodded slightly, and he leaned down to press his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that was over almost before it began, but which left her feeling dizzy and strange. They signed the register, making it legal and official, and then accepted congratulations from the small group of witnesses. Martha hugged Harrison tightly and whispered that she should come by the store anytime she needed anything. The other townspeople, whom Blake introduced as neighbors and business associates, offered their good wishes with genuine warmth. Finally, they were outside in the afternoon sun, officially married, and Blake helped Harrison into the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. He took up the reins and turned to look at her, his expression serious. "We can stay in town tonight if you prefer," he offered. "Take more time before going to the ranch." Harrison considered it, then shook her head. "I would like to see my new home if that is acceptable. I would like to begin this new life." Blake's smile was like sunrise. "Then let us go home." The ride to the Triple Bar Ranch took just over an hour, following a well-worn track that led northwest from Fort Sumner. The landscape was unlike anything Harrison had known in Philadelphia, vast and open, with rolling plains covered in hardy grass and punctuated by rocky outcroppings. The sky seemed enormous, stretching from horizon to horizon in endless blue, and the air smelled of sage and dust, and something wild that Harrison could not name. Blake pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a distinctive rock formation that marked the edge of his land, a seasonal creek that sometimes flooded in spring, a grove of cottonwood trees where he often saw deer. He talked about the ranch with obvious pride, describing the work that went into maintaining it, the cycle of seasons that governed ranch life, the satisfaction of building something lasting. Harrison listened and watched, feeling her nervousness gradually transform into anticipation. This was going to be her life now, this wide open space, this honest work, this man beside her who spoke of his dreams with such passion. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low rise, and Harrison caught her breath. It was larger than she had expected, a solid structure of wood and stone with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. There was a barn nearby, corrals with horses, and several smaller outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, several men emerged from the barn to watch their arrival. Blake pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Harrison descend. His hands circled her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood close together, his hands warm through the lace dress. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them before Blake stepped back and turned to the waiting men. "Boys, this is my wife, Mrs. Harrison Anderson," he said, and Harrison felt a thrill at hearing her new name spoken aloud. "Harrison, these are my ranch hands." The men came forward one by one to be introduced. There was Tom, the foreman, a weathered man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and shrewd eyes. There was young Sam, barely 20, with red hair and freckles and a shy smile. There was Carlos, a Mexican vaquero with silver conchos on his hatband and the most beautiful saddle Harrison had ever seen. And there were two brothers, Jesse and Jack, both tall and lean and so similar in appearance that Harrison knew she would have trouble telling them apart at first. "Pleased to meet you, madam," Tom said, and the others echoed the sentiment. They seemed genuinely happy that Blake had married, and Harrison relaxed slightly under their welcoming gazes. "Come on," Blake said, taking her elbow gently. "Let me show you the house." He led her up the porch steps and through the front door, and Harrison stepped into her new home. The main room was spacious and well built, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy table with chairs, and comfortable furniture arranged to take advantage of the light from the windows. The floor was wood, polished smooth, and covered with woven rugs. Everything was neat and clean, better maintained than she would have expected from a bachelor household. "Tom's wife, Sarah, has been helping keep the place clean," Blake explained, following her gaze. "She comes twice a week. I thought you might appreciate not walking into complete chaos." "It is wonderful," Harrison said honestly, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Much nicer than I expected." Blake showed her the rest of the house. There was a kitchen with a real stove and a pump right at the sink, a luxury Harrison had not expected. There was a pantry stocked with supplies, a dining room with a beautiful oak table, and two bedrooms. The larger one was clearly Blake's, with a massive bed covered in a colorful quilt, a wardrobe, and a chest of drawers. The second bedroom was smaller and currently empty except for a single chair. "I thought this could be a sewing room for you, or whatever you might want it to be," Blake said. "Eventually, God willing, it might be a nursery." The mention of children made Harrison's cheeks flush, because children would require the activities that led to children, activities she had only the vaguest understanding of. Her mother had died before having such conversations with her, and what little Harrison knew came from whispered gossip among the seamstresses at the shop. If Blake noticed her blush, he politely ignored it. He showed her the rest of the house, including a back porch with a view of the sunset that took her breath away, and then brought her packages in from the wagon. He placed them in the bedroom, their bedroom, and then stood somewhat awkwardly in the middle of the main room. "I am sure you are tired," he said. "It has been a long day. Why do not you rest, and I will make us some dinner?" "You cook?" Harrison asked, surprised. Blake smiled slightly. "I have had to learn. I am not fancy at it, but I can manage basic meals. Tom's wife usually prepares extra for me, but I sent word that we would not need anything today. I wanted our first evening to be private." The thoughtfulness of that gesture touched Harrison deeply. She was tired, the emotional weight of the day catching up with her, and the idea of resting was appealing. But she also did not want Blake to think she was lazy or unwilling to pull her weight. "Let me help," she offered. "I am a good cook, or at least I used to be when I had access to a proper kitchen." They worked together in the kitchen, an awkward dance at first as they learned to navigate around each other in the space. Blake had the makings of a simple meal, beef and potatoes and canned vegetables, and Harrison set about preparing it while Blake built up the fire in the stove. They talked as they worked, small talk about the ranch and the town, gradually growing more comfortable with each other's presence. Dinner was ready as the sun began to set, and they sat at the table together, husband and wife, sharing their first meal in their home. The food was good, simple but satisfying, and the conversation flowed more easily now. Blake asked about her life in Philadelphia, and Harrison told him about growing up in a small house with loving parents, her father's work as a clerk, her mother's skill with a needle. She told him about the fever that had taken them both within days of each other when she was 18, leaving her alone and struggling to survive. "I tried to keep the house, but I could not afford it on what I made as a seamstress," she explained. "I sold everything and moved into a boarding house, sharing a room with 2 other women. It was not a terrible life, but it was not a life I wanted forever. When I saw the matrimonial times, I thought perhaps it was a chance for something better." "I am glad you took that chance," Blake said quietly. "I am glad you came here." Harrison met his eyes across the table. "So am I." After dinner, they washed the dishes together, and then Blake showed Harrison where everything in the house was kept, from extra blankets to tools to emergency supplies. He was thorough and patient, clearly wanting her to feel at home, and Harrison appreciated every detail. As full darkness fell outside, they found themselves standing in the main room, the fire crackling in the hearth, and the weight of their new relationship suddenly very present between them. They were married. Legally and morally, Blake had every right to expect her in his bed tonight. The thought made Harrison's mouth go dry with nervousness and something else, something that fluttered warm and strange in her belly. Blake seemed to sense her anxiety because he reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle. "Harrison, I want you to understand something. I know we were married today, and I know what that typically means, but I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give. We can take time to get to know each other. There is no rush." Relief and disappointment warred in Harrison's chest. "You would be content with that?" "Even though we are married, I would be content with whatever makes you comfortable," Blake said firmly. "I did not bring you here to force you into anything. I brought you here to be my partner, my wife, to build a life together. That means respecting what you need." Harrison looked up at him, at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and consideration since the moment she arrived. He had bought her clothes without question, married her despite her bedraggled appearance, called her his wife with pride, and now offered her time and space to adjust. "How many men would do the same?" "Thank you," she said softly. "I appreciate your patience. This is all very new and somewhat frightening." "I understand." Blake squeezed her hand and then released it. "The bedroom is yours tonight. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Harrison protested. "This is your home." "It is our home now," Blake corrected gently. "And I insist. You have had weeks of difficult travel and need proper rest. We can figure out permanent arrangements tomorrow." Harrison wanted to argue further but found she was too exhausted to mount much of a protest. She nodded and moved toward the bedroom, then paused at the doorway and looked back. Blake stood by the fire, his profile limned in golden light, and something in her chest squeezed tight. "Blake." He turned to look at her. "Yes, thank you for everything today, for the dress, for calling me your wife with such pride, for treating me like I matter. No one has made me feel treasured in a very long time." Blake's expression softened, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, and reached up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender and intimate, and Harrison's breath caught. "You are my wife," he said quietly. "You are my treasure. Of course you matter." Then he bent and pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering just a moment before stepping back. "Good night, Harrison. Sleep well." Harrison fled into the bedroom before she could do something foolish like cry or grab onto him, or confess that she was starting to feel things for him that probably came too soon. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding, her skin still tingling where his lips had touched. This was her wedding night, and she was spending it alone in her husband's bed while he slept by the fire. It should have felt wrong or disappointing, but instead it felt perfect. Blake was giving her the space to adjust, the time to grow comfortable, and that gift was more precious than anything else he could have offered. Harrison changed into one of her new nightgowns, a practical cotton one with long sleeves, and climbed into the big bed. The sheets smelled like soap and sunshine, and the mattress was comfortable. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, and thought about the man sleeping in the other room. Blake Anderson was a good man. More than that, he was a kind man, a patient man, a man who kept his word and treated her with respect. She could build a life with such a man. She could even, perhaps, fall in love with him. The thought should have frightened her, but as sleep claimed her, Harrison found she was smiling. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Harrison found surprisingly satisfying. She woke each morning to find Blake already up and working, and she would dress quickly and prepare breakfast for him and the ranch hands. The men were grateful for her cooking, which was certainly better than their own rough attempts, and they slowly grew more comfortable around her. Harrison threw herself into making the house truly a home. She cleaned thoroughly, organized the pantry, and began planning small improvements. Blake gave her free rein to do whatever she wanted, and when she mentioned wanting curtains for the windows, he took her back to Fort Sumner the very next day to buy fabric from Martha. "You are settling in well," Martha observed as she helped Harrison select material. "Blake looks happier than I have seen him in years." "He is a good husband," Harrison said, and meant it. Blake was attentive and considerate, helping her learn the rhythms of ranch life without making her feel incompetent. He had patience with her mistakes and praised her successes. Most evenings, after the work was done, they sat together on the porch and talked, really talked, sharing stories and dreams and gradually building real intimacy. But they still slept separately. Blake had moved some blankets into the smaller bedroom, turning it into a makeshift sleeping space for himself, and had not pushed at all for anything more. Harrison appreciated his restraint, but as the days turned into a week and then 2, she found herself increasingly aware of him in ways that made her pulse race. She noticed the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he worked. She noticed the strength in his hands and found herself wondering what they would feel like on her skin. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, with heat in his blue eyes that he quickly banked, and she wondered what would happen if she gave him permission to stop holding back. 3 weeks after their wedding, Harrison was working in the garden she had started near the house when she heard a commotion from the direction of the barn. Raised voices, the sound of hooves, and then Blake's voice cutting through the noise with authority. Harrison stood, shading her eyes to see what was happening. A group of riders had arrived, 7 or 8 men on horseback, and they were surrounding Blake and Tom in what looked like a confrontational stance. Harrison's heart began to pound as she walked quickly toward the barn. As she got closer, she could hear the conversation. The leader of the riders, a hard-faced man with a scar across his cheek, was speaking in an aggressive tone. "You are using water that does not belong to you, Anderson. Mr. Thornton has made that clear. You need to stop running your cattle to the North Creek." "That creek crosses my land," Blake said, his voice calm but firm. "I have the deed to prove it. Thornton does not get to decide where I water my stock." "Mr. Thornton owns most of the land around here," Scarface said. "He does not appreciate newcomers who do not respect how things work." "I have been ranching this land for 10 years, Blake replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I am hardly a newcomer, and I will continue to use the water on my own property as I see fit." The man's hand moved toward his gun, and Harrison felt ice flood her veins. But before anything could happen, she stepped forward into the circle of men, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Gentlemen, is there a problem?" Every head turned toward her, and Harrison kept her chin high despite the fear racing through her. She walked directly to Blake's side, taking his arm in a clear show of unity. She felt him stiffen with surprise, but he did not pull away. "Madam, this does not concern you," Scarface said, though some of the aggression had leaked from his tone. "If it concerns my husband, it concerns me," Harrison said firmly. "Now, I suggest you take your complaints to the proper authorities if you believe there is a legal dispute about water rights. Coming here to threaten and intimidate is not how civilized people handle disagreements." One of the other riders snorted, trying to cover a laugh, and Scarface's face flushed red. But Harrison's calm, matter-of-fact tone had diffused some of the tension, and after a long moment, the man nodded curtly. "You will be hearing from Mr. Thornton's lawyer," he said. "Do not say you were not warned." The riders turned and left, kicking up dust as they rode away, and Harrison felt her knees go weak with delayed reaction. Blake caught her elbow, steadying her, his face a mixture of concern and admiration. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said. "Probably both. I could not just stand there and watch them threaten you," Harrison said, her voice shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. "Are you all right?" "I am fine." Blake guided her back toward the house, his hand firm on her back. "But Harrison, you should not have put yourself at risk like that. Those men were dangerous." "So are you, I imagine, when you need to be," Harrison countered. "And I am your wife. I will not hide in the house when you are in danger." Blake stopped walking and turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You are remarkable, do you know that? Any other woman would have screamed or fainted or run. You walked right into the middle of it like you owned the place." "I do own the place," Harrison said, a smile tugging at her lips despite her lingering fear. "Half of it anyway, as your wife." Blake laughed, a sound of genuine delight, and pulled her into a hug that surprised them both. Harrison went still for a moment, then relaxed into his embrace, her arms coming up to circle his waist. He was solid and warm, and being held by him felt safe and right in a way that made her never want to let go. "Thank you," Blake murmured against her hair. "Thank you for standing with me." "Always," Harrison promised, and meant it with her whole heart. That night after dinner, they sat on the porch as had become their custom. The sun was setting in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the air was cooling pleasantly after the heat of the day. Harrison sat in her usual chair, but Blake seemed restless, standing at the porch railing and looking out at his land with a troubled expression. "Tell me about this Thornton," Harrison said. "Why is he causing problems?" Blake sighed and turned to lean against the railing, facing her. "Richard Thornton owns the biggest spread in this part of the territory. He has been trying to buy up all the smaller ranches for years, consolidating power. I have refused to sell to him multiple times, and it galls him. He is used to getting what he wants. And the water dispute. The creek runs through both our properties. I have every legal right to use it, but Thornton wants exclusive access. He thinks if he can pressure me enough, I will sell out. Blake's jaw tightened. But I will not. This ranch is everything I have worked for. It is my future, our future. I will not let some land baron bully me into giving it up. Harrison stood and crossed to where Blake stood, placing her hand over his where it gripped the railing. Then we will fight him together. Legally, properly, but we will not back down. Blake looked down at her, and the intensity in his gaze made Harrison's breath catch. When I brought you here, I did not expect this kind of trouble. I am sorry you have been dragged into it. I am not, Harrison said firmly. I came here to be your partner, to share your life, whatever that entails. I am not some fragile flower who needs to be protected from reality. No, you are definitely not fragile, Blake agreed, a smile playing at his lips. You are strong and brave and absolutely terrifying when you need to be. Those men today did not know what hit them, Harrison laughed. I was shaking in my boots the whole time. But you did it anyway. That is what courage is. Blake's expression grew serious again. Harrison, these past few weeks have been better than I dared to hope. You have made this house a home. You have won over the ranch hands, who are a tough bunch to impress. You have made me happier than I have been in years. I want you to know that. You have made me happy too, Harrison said softly. Happier than I was in Philadelphia, happier than I thought I could be. This life, this place, it all feels right somehow. They stood close together in the fading light, and Harrison could feel the pull between them, the attraction that had been building since the day they met. Blake's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with exquisite gentleness. I want to kiss you, he said, his voice low and rough. Really kiss you, not like at the wedding, but only if you want that too. Harrison's heart hammered against her ribs. She had been thinking about this for days, wondering what it would be like, wanting it more than she had been willing to admit even to herself. I want that, she whispered. Blake leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and then his lips met hers. This kiss was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was deep and searching, his mouth moving against hers in a way that made her knees weak and her stomach flutter. Harrison gripped his shirt for balance, and Blake's arms came around her, pulling her close against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison felt dazed and warm and wonderful. Blake rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he confessed. So have I, Harrison admitted. Blake, I think we have been patient enough. I think maybe it is time we started really being husband and wife. Blake pulled back enough to meet her eyes, searching her face. Are you sure? I do not want you to feel pressured. I am sure, Harrison said, and she was. She wanted this man, wanted to truly be his wife in every way. She wanted to wake up beside him every morning and fall asleep in his arms every night. She wanted to build a life and a family with him. I want this. I want you. The heat that flared in Blake's eyes made Harrison's stomach do somersaults. He took her hand and led her inside, through the house to the bedroom they had been avoiding for 3 weeks. The room was dim in the evening light, the big bed dominating the space, and Harrison felt a flutter of nervousness return. Blake lit a lamp, keeping the flame low, and then turned to her. We will go slowly, he promised. If you want to stop at any point, just tell me. Harrison nodded, trusting him completely. Blake came to her and began unpinning her hair with careful fingers, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. He ran his hands through it, his touch reverent, and then began helping her with the buttons of her dress. What followed was tender and sometimes awkward, as all first times are, but also sweet and ultimately satisfying. Blake was patient and careful, making sure Harrison was comfortable, and by the time they finally lay together in the aftermath, tangled in the sheets, Harrison felt transformed. She was truly married now, truly his wife, and the intimacy they had shared felt like the final piece clicking into place. "Are you all right?" Blake asked, his voice drowsy and content as he stroked her hair. "Better than all right," Harrison said honestly, snuggling closer into his warmth. "That was worth waiting for." Blake chuckled and pressed a kiss to her temple. "It was indeed. Sleep now. Tomorrow is another full day." Harrison drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, feeling safe and cherished and completely at home. The following weeks brought new challenges and new joys. True to Scarface's threat, Richard Thornton's lawyer did contact them, presenting a legal challenge to their water rights. Blake hired his own lawyer in Fort Sumner, a sharp-minded man named Williams who believed they had a strong case. The legal battle would take months to resolve, but Blake was determined to fight it properly. Meanwhile, Harrison continued to make her mark on the ranch. She started a vegetable garden that thrived under her care, providing fresh food for the household. She made curtains and cushions for the house, transforming it from a bachelor's dwelling into a real home. She learned to ride a horse, with Blake as her patient teacher, and began accompanying him on rides around the ranch to check on the cattle. The physical relationship between them deepened and grew more comfortable, and Harrison discovered that she enjoyed the intimacy immensely. Blake was an attentive and generous lover, and the nights they spent together brought them closer in ways that mere conversation never could. One morning about 6 weeks after their wedding, Harrison woke feeling queasy and barely made it outside before she was sick. Blake found her on the back porch, pale and shaky, and his face filled with concern until understanding dawned. "Are you?" he asked, unable to finish the question. Harrison pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. "I think I might be. It is early yet, but the signs are there." Blake's face transformed with joy, and he swept her into a careful hug. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Maybe," Harrison cautioned, though she could not help smiling at his excitement. "Let me be certain before we celebrate too much." But as the weeks passed and her courses did not come, it became clear that she was indeed expecting. Blake was simultaneously thrilled and terrified, treating her like spun glass despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. The ranch hands, when they learned the news, were genuinely happy for them. Sarah, Tom's wife, became a frequent visitor, offering advice and friendship that Harrison valued immensely. And Martha Cooper in town was beside herself with excitement, already planning what she would make for the baby. The legal battle with Thornton dragged on through the fall, but their lawyer was optimistic. The deeds were clear, and unless Thornton could produce evidence that superseded their claim, which Williams doubted, they would prevail. In the meantime, Blake made sure to document every instance of harassment or intimidation from Thornton's men, building a case that might even result in legal consequences for the land baron. As winter approached and Harrison's pregnancy became visible, life on the ranch settled into a contented routine. They worked hard during the day and spent their evenings planning for the future, for the child that would arrive in the spring, for the life they were building together. One evening in late December, as they sat before the fire with snow falling softly outside, Blake pulled Harrison close against his side and pressed a kiss to her hair. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Answering my advertisement, coming out here, marrying a stranger?" Harrison thought about the frightened, desperate girl who had stepped off that stagecoach 4 months ago in a torn dress, looking for a new chance. She thought about the man who had seen past her bedraggled appearance to the woman underneath, who had bought her a lace dress and called her his treasure, who had given her time and patience and love. "Not for a single moment," she said, turning to kiss him properly. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." Blake smiled against her lips. "You are my treasure, Harrison Anderson. Then, now, and always." "And you are mine," Harrison replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Winter passed in a blur of quiet domesticity. Harrison spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny garments and blankets while the snow fell outside. Blake and the ranch hands kept the cattle fed and safe from the harsh weather, and the house remained warm and cozy thanks to the excellent fireplace and Blake's diligence in keeping wood stocked. The legal battle with Thornton finally concluded in late February, with a decisive victory for Blake. The judge ruled that their water rights were ironclad and issued an injunction preventing Thornton from interfering with their access to the creek. More than that, the judge warned Thornton that any further harassment would result in serious consequences. It was a complete vindication, and Blake came home from the hearing triumphant. "It is over," he told Harrison, sweeping her up in a careful hug that accounted for her swollen belly. "The ranch is secure. Our future is secure." "Our child's future is secure," Harrison added, placing her hands over his where they rested on her stomach. Blake knelt down and pressed a kiss to her belly, speaking to the baby within. "You hear that, little one? Your home is safe. You are going to grow up here on this land with parents who love you more than anything." Harrison ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man. He had given her everything she had never dared to dream of: a home, a purpose, a family, and love, so much love. Spring arrived with a burst of green across the plains, and with it came the day Harrison went into labor. It was early April, with wildflowers blooming across the ranch when the pains began. Blake immediately rode for Sarah, who had agreed to attend the birth, and for the doctor from Fort Sumner, just in case there were complications. The labor was long and difficult, as first births often are, and Blake paced the main room like a caged animal while Sarah and the doctor worked with Harrison in the bedroom. When the baby's first cry finally rang out, Blake nearly broke down the door in his haste to get to his wife. Harrison lay exhausted but radiant in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. She looked up as Blake entered, and her smile was luminous. "We have a son," she said. "A healthy, loud, perfect son." Blake approached with shaking hands and looked down at his child for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Blake had ever seen, except for the woman who had given birth to him. "Can I hold him?" Blake asked, his voice thick with emotion. Harrison carefully transferred the baby into his arms, and Blake cradled his son with the same gentleness he had always shown her. The baby quieted at his father's touch, and Blake felt something in his chest crack wide open with love. "What should we name him?" Harrison asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Blake looked down at his son, this new life that represented their future, and thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "How about James, after your father?" Blake suggested. "James Anderson." Harrison's eyes filled with tears. "You would name him after my father. Your parents would be so proud of you if they could see you now," Blake said softly. "Proud of your strength, your courage, the life you have built. It seems right to honor them." "James Anderson," Harrison repeated, tasting the name. "Jamie for short. I love it." The days that followed were a blur of sleeplessness and joy. Jamie was a hungry baby who demanded frequent feeding, and Harrison spent most of her time nursing and resting. Blake took over many of her household duties, and the ranch hands pitched in cheerfully, clearly delighted by the new addition. As weeks turned into months, Jamie grew strong and healthy. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and his personality was emerging as sunny and curious. Blake was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, and Harrison often found them together, Blake talking to Jamie as if he could understand every word. The ranch prospered as well. The cattle herd grew, and Blake hired 2 additional ranch hands to help manage the expanding operation. He began making plans to build additional outbuildings and maybe even expand the house when they had more children. When we have more children. Harrison teased one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Jamie sleep in his cradle beside them. "You are already planning for more." "Well, Jamie needs brothers and sisters," Blake said reasonably, "and I quite enjoy the process of making babies with you." Harrison laughed and swatted his arm. "You are incorrigible. You love me anyway," Blake countered, pulling her close for a kiss. "I do," Harrison agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you so much it sometimes scares me. I never knew it was possible to be this happy." Blake tightened his arm around her. "I love you too, treasure. You took a huge risk coming out here, and you have given me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a reason to build something lasting. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together in the gathering dusk, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, listening to their son's gentle breathing, and feeling the deep contentment of 2 people who had found exactly what they were looking for. 2 years passed in a flurry of activity and growth. Jamie became a toddler, running around the ranch on chubby legs, and getting into everything with gleeful curiosity. Harrison discovered she was expecting again, and in the spring of 1881, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, after Blake's mother and Tom's wife, who had become such a good friend. The ranch continued to prosper. Blake's reputation as a fair and honest rancher spread, and he began taking on occasional contract work, helping other smaller ranchers stand up to men like Thornton who tried to bully them. He never charged much, just enough to cover his time, because he remembered what it was like to be the little guy fighting for survival. Harrison became known in Fort Sumner as a woman of sense and capability. She helped organize a women's group that met monthly to discuss everything from recipes to politics, and she became an advocate for better schools in the territory. Martha Cooper became one of her closest friends, and the 2 women could often be found at the general store, discussing life over tea while their children played. The house was expanded to include 2 more bedrooms, and Harrison filled it with love and laughter. She taught Jamie his letters and numbers, and Blake taught him to ride a horse. Little Sarah grew into a bright, inquisitive child with her mother's determination and her father's easy smile. 5 years after Harrison first stepped off that stagecoach in rags, she stood on the porch of her home, watching Blake teach Jamie to rope a fence post while Sarah played with a kitten nearby. The sun was warm on her face, and she could see the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. The house behind her was filled with the evidence of their life together. Children's toys, her sewing basket, Blake's books, photographs on the walls. She thought about the scared young woman who had traveled west in search of something better, who had arrived in torn clothes with nothing but hope and determination. She thought about the man who had seen past her appearance to her worth, who had dressed her in lace and called her his treasure. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting. They had faced challenges and overcome them. They had created a family and a home. They had found love, real and deep and enduring. Blake looked up from his lesson with Jamie and caught her watching them. His face broke into the smile she loved so much, and he called out to her, "Come here, treasure. I want to show you what Jamie just learned." Harrison walked down the porch steps to join her family, her heart full to overflowing. She had taken a risk answering that advertisement, and it had led her to everything she had ever wanted. As Blake's arm came around her waist, and Jamie showed off his new skill, as Sarah toddled over demanding attention, Harrison knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. Not just a place, but a life, a purpose, and a love that would last the rest of her days. She looked up at Blake, this good man who had given her everything, and he looked back at her with the same love and devotion he had shown from the very beginning. "I love you," she said, simple words that carried the weight of everything they had built together. "I love you too, treasure," Blake replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always and forever." And standing there on their land, surrounded by their children, with the sun setting over the New Mexico territory they called home, Harrison knew that she had found her happily ever after. It had not been the fairy tale she might have imagined as a girl, but it was something better. It was real, and it was theirs, and it was absolutely perfect. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Harrison and Blake welcomed 2 more children into their growing family, twin boys they named Thomas and Daniel, born in the spring of 1883. The house rang with laughter and chaos, with children's voices and the sounds of a family deeply in love with life and each other. Jamie grew into a responsible young boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of ranching with eager enthusiasm. Sarah proved to have her mother's talent with a needle and her father's head for numbers, a combination that Blake joked would make her either a wealthy businesswoman or a dangerous poker player. The twins were holy terrors, getting into mischief at every turn, but their sunny dispositions made it impossible to stay angry with them for long. The Triple Bar Ranch became known as one of the most successful spreads in the territory. Blake's fair dealing and hard work paid off, and he was able to purchase additional land, expanding their holdings significantly. He remained deeply involved in the community, serving on town councils and helping new ranchers get established. Harrison's influence extended beyond the ranch as well. The women's group she had helped start grew into a powerful force for good in Fort Sumner, advocating for schools, libraries, and better medical facilities. When New Mexico achieved statehood, which everyone predicted would happen eventually, Harrison was determined that their town would be ready to participate fully in democratic government. But beyond the accomplishments and the prosperity, what mattered most to Harrison was the life she had built with Blake. After more than 7 years of marriage, she loved him more deeply than she had thought possible. He was her partner in every sense, sharing the work and the decisions, respecting her opinions and cherishing her affection. Their physical relationship had only deepened over the years, becoming a source of comfort and connection that grounded them both. On difficult days, they could find solace in each other's arms. On joyful days, they celebrated together. The intimacy they shared was a testament to the trust and love that formed the foundation of their marriage. One evening in the fall of 1885, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Harrison and Blake sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Blake pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. "Do you remember the day you arrived?" Blake asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "You stepped off that stage looking like you had been through a war, and I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen." Harrison smiled at the memory, which seemed both distant and yesterday all at once. "I remember thinking you must be crazy to still want to marry me after seeing what a mess I was. I saw who you really were, Blake corrected. Strong, determined, beautiful. The dress did not matter. Nothing mattered except the woman inside it. You bought me that lace dress, Harrison remembered. You barely knew me, and you spent so much money making sure I felt treasured. Because you were my treasure, Blake said, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. You are my treasure, Harrison. You always will be. You came into my life and transformed everything. You gave me a family, a real home, a reason to work for something bigger than myself. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Tears filled Harrison's eyes, happy tears this time. You saved me, Blake. I was barely surviving in Philadelphia, with no future and no hope. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me love, real love, and I am so grateful every single day that I answered your advertisement. Blake kissed her then, deep and sweet, a kiss that held 7 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling. We have built something good here, Blake said, looking out at the ranch spread before them in the moonlight. Not just the ranch, but our family, our life together. This is what I always wanted, and you made it possible. We made it possible together, Harrison corrected. That is what partnership means. We built this life side by side, through challenges and joys, and we will keep building it together for the rest of our days. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Harrison felt a deep peace settle over her. This was her life now, this ranch, this man, these children. This was home in every sense of the word. The years ahead would bring new challenges, she knew. Children would grow and face their own trials. The ranch would have good years and bad. Life would continue with all its complications and surprises. But whatever came, she and Blake would face it together, just as they had faced everything from the beginning. She thought about that young woman who had arrived in rags, desperate and afraid but still brave enough to reach for something better. She thought about the cowboy who had looked past her appearance to see her worth, who had dressed her in lace and called her his treasure, who had given her time and patience and love. They had both taken a risk on each other, trusting in letters and instinct and hope. And that risk had led them to this, to a love deeper than anything Harrison had ever imagined possible, to a family that filled her heart to overflowing, to a life rich with meaning and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Blake asked, sensing her reflective mood. Harrison turned to look at him, this man who was everything to her, and smiled. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how blessed we are, and how much I love this life we have built together." Blake's expression softened with tenderness. "I am the lucky one, treasure. You took a chance on a lonely rancher and you gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Harrison corrected, leaning in to kiss him again. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They went inside hand in hand, checked on their sleeping children one more time, and retired to their bedroom. As Harrison lay in Blake's arms that night, listening to his steady breathing as he slept, she felt complete contentment wash over her. She had found her home, not just a physical place, but a sense of belonging that came from being loved and valued for exactly who she was. She had found her purpose in building this family and this life. And she had found her happiness in the simple everyday moments of being Blake Anderson's wife. The mail-order bride who arrived in rags had become the rancher's wife, who wore confidence and joy more beautifully than any lace. The cowboy who dressed her with care had become the husband and father whose love anchored their entire family. Together, they had created something rare and precious, a true partnership built on respect, trust, and deep abiding love. And as Harrison drifted off to sleep, warm and safe in her husband's embrace, she knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly the life she was meant to live. The treasure was not the dress or the ranch or even the children, though all those things were precious. The real treasure was the love they shared, a love that had started with hope and grown into something unshakable and eternal. And that love would continue to sustain them through all the years ahead, a beacon of light guiding them home to each other, again and again, for the rest of their lives together. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending but something better, something real and earned and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Harrison had found everything she had been searching for and more. She had found her home, her family, and her forever in the arms of a cowboy who saw her true worth and loved her for exactly who she was. And Blake had found his partner, his treasure, his love in a brave woman who had traveled across a continent to take a chance on him. Together, they had built a legacy that would endure for generations, written in the love they shared, the children they raised, and the land they cherished. The Triple Bar Ranch would stand as a testament to what could be achieved when two people committed fully to each other and to building something beautiful together. As dawn broke over the New Mexico territory the next morning, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the Anderson family began another day. Blake rose early to start the chores, pausing to press a gentle kiss to Harrison's forehead. She woke enough to smile at him, reaching up to touch his face in a gesture of affection and connection. The children tumbled out of their beds one by one, filling the house with noise and energy. Harrison prepared breakfast while Blake brought in fresh milk from the cow, their movements around each other easy and synchronized after years of partnership. They gathered around the table together, this family they had created, and blessed their food and their life. This was their story, the mail-order bride and the cowboy, a love story that began with hope and determination and blossomed into something that would last all their days. From desperate beginnings to a life rich with love and purpose, they had found their way to each other and built something precious that would endure. And every day for the rest of their lives, Blake would look at Harrison and see his treasure, the brave woman who had answered his advertisement and changed his life forever. And Harrison would look at Blake and see her home, the kind man who had given her everything she needed to become who she was always meant to be. Their love story was complete, not because it had ended, but because it had found its true beginning. And that beginning would carry them through all the days ahead, through triumphs and trials, through ordinary moments and extraordinary ones, always together, always treasuring each other, always in love. This was their happily ever after, and it was absolutely perfect.